Right now, though, I want to get into this rather troubling report that we saw this morning. Self-harm among Canadian youth is an increasing problem, according to a new report on international injuries such as cutting and poisoning. I know this is not a very pleasant subject, but it's something that we do need to discuss. The report from the Canadian Institute for Mental Health Information focuses on children and youth who have been hospitalized for self-harm or assault. This is a rather troubling phenomenon for a lot of parents and caregivers who are trying to deal with this right now. Joining us on the program to talk about this is Gary Dernfeld, social worker, of course, the website yoursocialworker.com. Great website that's got some fascinating and very educational links on it. Gary, thank you so much for the time. Good to have you with us today.
Good to be back with you, Bill.
Why is this happening?
So why do children or teens self-harm, engage in self-injurious behavior?
Yeah.
Simple question to a complex issue. I will go to a quick bottom line. They do it to relieve distress, typically. And like any dysfunctional stress reliever, it actually can become addictive. It can become addictive in that, in a sense, it works. It does relieve stress in the moment, and because it provides that sense of relief, even though it may hurt in the moment, that feels better than the pain felt.
But isn't this contrary to, I don't want to say human nature, because I don't know if that's it seems to be a pretty blasé term. But I mean, for adults to do this, I understand where you're coming from here, Gary, where, because we've heard of adults that will quote unquote self-medicate. You know, they may drink to excess or use, some sort of narcotic or something to relieve the stress. But invariably they'll say, yeah, well, you know what? It makes me feel good while I'm doing it. There's a bit of a buzz. You're physically hurting yourself here.
Yeah, well, first of all, preteens, teens, they're not going to necessarily have access to the drugs or alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think of it in terms of it being a distraction from the psychic pain that they are feeling, then it's easier to understand. The other thing, to make it more understandable, never acceptable, but understandable, is for many of these teens, they feel like they have no control over the particular stressors affecting them, but they do have control when they're actually hurting themselves. So it gives them that very limited sense of control in circumstances that are out of control.
Ergo, they can control their own pain, but they can't control the pain that somebody else is inflicting on them.
Yes. Yes.
All right. I understand where it just seems so strange and so productive.
Counterintuitive.
Yeah, it really does in so many different ways. There's so many different angles that we want to touch about on this. And first of all, the fact that the numbers are increasing, I guess, really, based on some of the conversations you and I have had over the last number of years, Gary, maybe that shouldn't be surprising when we look at some of the stresses and some of the pressures that are on people, whether it's from cyberbullying or any number of other things like this. In other words, it is a pressure cooker for some of these kids.
Yeah, so issues of children's mental health continue to increase while funding for children's mental health services have not kept pace and in many cases have decreased. Children's mental health is the poor cousin when it comes to money for health services, and then children's mental health is the even poorer poor cousin when it comes to funding. And that's against a backdrop of greater parental pressure. So as our parents are more distressed themselves, they have less capacity to appropriately meet the needs of their children. So stress begets stress, and it falls down the line, and the kids who have, because they're kids, they're going to have much more limited coping skills. They can't avail themselves of some of the more appropriate strategies that may be available to parents. These kids at times keep family secrets, the pain of whatever's going on in their family. Kids today, in terms of additional stressors, have to cope with the internet. You and I didn't have to cope with that growing up.
No.
Where, one critical post against one kid leads to a gangbang of like-minded posts piling on that kid. And, our parents aren't necessarily privy to that. The child who experiences that is embarrassed and feeling shameful and scared and intimidated. So there's all sorts of increased pressures on our kids today.
Now, this is something I have learned from Gary Durenfeld over our conversations over the years, too. Because when we talk about the role of parents here, and you say that there can be two problems, there are, I guess, the prototypical parents who really don't give a damn what their kids are doing, so the kids don't really feel that they can relate to them. But you told me that there's another side here, too, of parents that are too smothering.
Yeah.
That don't allow their kids. Now, that's something we may not ordinarily think of, but I remember you telling me in a past program that can be a real problem, too.
Right. So let me deal with the first side of that, what you call the prototypical parent who's being neglectful. I don't want to badmouth all parents out there. Sometimes parents have less availability to their children, not because they're bad parents, because they too are stressed out trying to make ends meet in a tougher economy.
Sure.
We have many more part-time jobs that are low-paying, and so parents have to have a multitude of low-paying part-time jobs, which means more time away from the kids with less resources to manage them. So I don't want to blame the parents for that, but issues do befall those children, the result of that. Then on the other hand, for years now we've been talking about bubble-wrapped kids or helicopter parents. And so that speaks to your second point, Bill, that those parents who continually pave the road as their child walks forward, such that the child feels no bumps. These are kids who don't have the opportunity to build what we call resiliency. Resiliency is the capacity to overcome adversity. So if we spare our kids all manner of adversity, we pave the road, there will come a point in their life where that child hits a bump. Then when they do, they don't have the coping skills. So in fact, we don't want to smooth the road for our kids, but help them manage the road when they hit those bumps.
When we talk about self-injuries and things like this, Gary, I mean, I've seen statistics, and I think that, we've talked about the reports that have been done, and we know about cutting, and that can be problematic, obviously. Here's one of the things, and that's troubling enough. But I was surprised as I read this report this morning to find out that self-poisoning makes up 88% of intentional self-harm. Does that surprise you?
No, but I think at times the rationale, the severity of what's going on in that child's life is likely different, and those are more likely to be suicide attempts or suicidal gestures than it is what we call, what we typically refer to from the cutting. When the if I may say, the typical child is cutting, it sounds like an odd thing to say, but when a preteen, a young teen is cutting, we're typically referring to non-life-threatening, scratching, or minor lacerations, typically forearm, thighs, possibly belly, possibly buttocks, places that are easy to hide this. And so they're not going to die from this. It's just their way of, in a sense, gaining control of themselves and letting out some of their psychic pain through the physical pain. We differentiate that from a poisoning, which is more likely a suicidal gesture. Suicidal gesture doesn't equal I want to die, but it equals this is so bad, it's much more severe, it is certainly more dangerous, and we are seeing a rise in those suicidal gestures as well as the self-harming behavior, self-injurious behavior.
Gary, I've heard some people characterize this kind of behavior as a cry for help. Is that too simplistic an explanation?
The self-cutting the scratching, the minor lacerations, that really isn't so much a cry for help. That's done remarkably privately. The child isn't looking to get caught by that. They will wear clothes to cover up and disguise the injuries. That is a private, self-coping mechanism, inappropriate coping mechanism. The suicidal gesture may be considered more in that realm of a cry for help, depending how and depending where, particularly, though, when the child knows that they're going to be caught, knows that there will be a life-saving or a wellness-saving intervention. So in those circumstances, yes. And, of course, we're going to be very concerned for those children whose suicidal gestures are so extreme that it really isn't a gesture. It really is a suicide attempt or a successful suicide.
Let's talk about, because this is obviously a family circumstance. I mean, we're dealing with the young adults and young children and tweens, or whatever terminology you want to use, who may be doing this. How do parents respond to this? If you find out that your son or daughter is doing this, or I don't know, do they admit to doing it, or do parents discover this? And how do they react? How are they supposed to react to this?
So, firstly, when any of us are doing something that really we know we shouldn't be doing, none of us want to get caught. And it's like the 4-year-old with their hand in the cookie jar. So there's the 4-year-old hand in the cookie jar. Parent sees the hand in the cookie jar. Parent says to the kid, "You're stealing a cookie. I see your hand in the cookie jar." And the child still says, "No, I'm not." So you have to know that when we do come upon these behaviors, the very first reaction is going to be denial by the child. And it's not that the child is trying to lie for lying's sake. They're trying to protect their own sense of dignity and shame. So we don't want to compound the child's problems by saying, "Hey, not only did you cut yourself, now you're a liar too." No, we want to have a Jewish word, rachmanis. Rachmanis is it's a wonderful word. It's a hybrid between compassion, empathy, concern, and charity. So we want to have that compassion, concern, empathy, and charity by which we approach the child and say, "Look, I know you're saying no, but I can see the marks on your arms. I wasn't born yesterday. And son, daughter, I'm concerned for you. I love you." The child needs to feel an emotional connection to that parent, not that parent's admonishment or punishment.
What happens, though, if, because you want to obviously create that bond, if that bond isn't there, if it's weakened at that stage, are you the right person to be discussing it with the child, or do you need to bring somebody else in, a third party?
So when parents phone me with these concerns, as much as they say, meet with my child, I personally do not. I meet with the parents first. I need to assess the parents and help them learn sometimes how to best respond to, how to best meet their children's needs. More often than not, I'm very helpful with that. There is rare occasion where that parent may not actually have capacity. And so in those circumstances, it's almost as if we want to do a psychological or emotional rescue mission and connect that child to another caring adult that could provide those messages and support. But best case scenario is we educate and support the parent to better meet the emotional needs of the children.
So that it's a two-part process, obviously, and there's got to be some exploration about what's going on. What are the root causes of this? Is the child, and I hate to use the term child because in some cases these are young adults, are they open to talking about this? Is the fact that they've been discovered a door for them? Rarely open to talking about this. And indeed, if you bring that child, quickly into counseling, from the child's perspective, the child's concern is that you're bringing them to an authority adult who will likely wag a bigger finger at them. So when the child comes into counseling, you typically get one of two presentations. The first is, "You can't make me talk," and they sit there with their arms folded and they clam up.
Or alternately, you get the child who's angry at their parents and spews all sorts of terrible things about their parents being the devil. And you never know where the truth lies in that, by the way. So in these situations, the child-adolescent counselor literally has to spend months, or often months, meeting with that child in order to develop some degree of rapport before that child really opens up in a more realistic and meaningful way. That's why I don't go down that route, quite frankly. When you bring the child to counseling, it may give you the impression that something is being done, but the parents may not understand how long it will take to hopefully accrue a result. That's why I prefer to work with the parents first, and then you can always bring the child in afterwards once you have a read on the parents and how they're going to manage their child on a go-forward behavior basis, particularly with the appreciation that the child's behavior may be connected to something the parents can do differently.
How do you, the obvious question here that parents are going to have as they listen to this, Gary, is how do you get them to stop? I mean, you hear about something like this, you're traumatized as a parent, and they go, oh my God, my son or my daughter is doing this. You want it to stop immediately. Is that a fair expectation, or are parents going to have to be resigned to the fact that this is a process and it's going to take some time?
The expectation is fair. I wouldn't want my kid engaging in self-injurious behavior. I would want it stopped immediately. So the expectation's reasonable, but the process has to be appreciated. The child won't stop on the basis of the parent's declaration. The child will stop once the child's needs are best or better met. And, simple things such as sitting down together as a family and having dinner several times a week, God willing 5, 7, 6, 7 times a week, or a meal together. It doesn't have to be dinner. It could be breakfast. It might be easier to get together, for breakfast. Because when we get together as a family for a meal, these are the structures that provide us the opportunity to talk, to process day's events, to plan, to connect with one another. And very often, that's the part that's missing for the kid. We want parents to have influence, not necessarily control, but influence in their child's life. And you can only have that influence if you have a relationship. And relationships simply take time.
Gary Dernfeld, social worker. Go to the website. It's yoursocialworker.com. And Gary always has some great links and the blog, too. Check it out. There's always some interesting stuff. Gary, thanks as always for your insight into this. Appreciate it.
Please, we could chat about this today, Bill. You take care.
You too.